2015, I became the first woman with a spinal cord injury to be granted a race licence in the UK, but also I became the first female tetraplegic racing driver in the world. I was injured in a car crash when I was 16, broke my neck at level C67 complete. I honestly believe without wheelchair rugby I wouldn't be racing cars, because wheelchair rugby taught me resilience, it taught me independence, and it taught me how to accept my injury. The passion for cars came from the independence and I guess the coming to terms with being a disabled person. What I loved about it was I could do the same thing at the same time as able-bodied people, and I hadn't had that privilege since being injured.
Welcome to the Back Up and Thriving Accessible Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Sophie Elwes, and in this series I'll be interviewing a range of guests who are all affected by spinal cord injury. They'll be sharing their travel stories, experiences, and some fabulous advice. Our hope is that listeners will realise that travelling after spinal cord injury is not only possible, but that it can be life-changing too. Nathalie, great to see you. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you for having me on the podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for joining. I'm so excited to have this conversation. And I know a lot of listeners out there will be very curious to hear about your story and what you have to share, for sure.
Cool. I can't wait.
Amazing. Well, let's start. I think it would probably make sense if you're happy to kind of introduce yourself and tell us a bit about how your story and your journey kind of intersects with backup.
So I was injured in a car crash when I was 16, broke my neck at level C67 complete. I then did my rehab at Pinfields. I was living in East Yorkshire at the time. I was in hospital for 11 months back in the day when you actually did rehab time at spinal units and not thrown out after 3 months and fend for yourself. I then went straight back to school, got my A-levels, and then 2 years later went to university and wanted to be a lawyer. So took subjects that might have allowed me to do that, which was English and French. Not quite sure how that would have got me into law school, but that was where I was going with it. And then I found wheelchair rugby and everything changed.
Okay.
So yeah, that was my kind of first stepping stone into racing, which sounds strange, but I honestly believe without wheelchair rugby I wouldn't be racing cars, because wheelchair rugby taught me resilience, it taught me independence, and it taught me how to accept my injury. And wheelchair rugby was my life for 10 years.
Oh, wow.
So yeah. And then in 2015 I became the first woman with a spinal cord injury to be granted a race licence in the UK, but also I became the first female tetraplegic racing driver in the world. And I think that's kind of my story in a nutshell.
Yeah. Amazing. I didn't know that you had such a kind of history with wheelchair rugby at all.
Oh yeah.
I'm excited to unpick that a bit. Did you discover it when you were in hospital?
Yes. So I was in hospital struggling a bit with just coming to terms with being a tetraplegic, I guess. And one of the physios brought in a man called Alan Smith, who unfortunately I learned passed away beginning of last year, but it died in his sleep in his bed, like we all wish we could go. And he was at a sailing course or competition in Portsmouth and came to the spinal unit on his way to a wheelchair rugby training session to show me how he independently transferred and weirdly how he pulled his trousers up. So when he got onto the bed, it's sort of like, oh, well, how am I going to do stuff like that? He just kind of transferred onto the bed and then hooked his thumbs in his belt loops and like hoiked his trousers back up. And I was like, that's a revelation. But yeah, so he came in primarily to show me how as a C67, he could independently transfer how he drove a normal car and how he could just get on with life. But the wheelchair rugby was a kind of coincidental story from him as to what he was doing that evening. And then I asked if I could go to the training session with him later that month, and that was it for me. I was
Oh,
hooked.
wow. Love that. I love that. What you're saying as well, it really shows the power of kind of peer support and, meeting someone else, especially in that early stage, to show you what life can look like, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It was because I don't remember anyone in the unit with kind of my level of injury being independent. A lady was brought in to show me how she could do her hair and makeup. I think she was slightly higher than me, but not a C56, but just less. She had less hand function than I did. But she was using an electric chair and a WAV and used a hoist at home, which like that could have been, if I had less function, that would have been me. And a lot of people do need that, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. I think independence comes in various forms, and whether that's being able to independently transfer or having autonomy over your care, it's so many different levels to that. But the nurses told me when I met this lady that they were all things that I should start to consider. And that really upset me because in my mind, the physios had said, with your level of injury, you can achieve X, Y, and Z. And what the nurses were saying was, we think you're going to fail. So when Alan Smith came in and showed me what he could do, that gave me the belief that there was life after becoming tetraplegic, and that wheelchair rugby kind of embodied everything that I wanted to be. So yeah, it was great.
Yeah, love that. I'm curious, and I think people listening will be too, perhaps, who are less familiar with spinal cord injury. How does your injury kind of present in terms of function and that sort of thing?
So I'm paralyzed from the chest down. I have limited finger function, and I don't have all the heads to my triceps, which if you're not anatomically minded, you might not know what that means, but it just triceps are one of the definitive factors that allow you to independently get yourself on and off a bed, in and out of a car. And I have depleted tricep muscles on my right arm. I have 3 heads to the tricep on my left arm. So I'm quite fortunate. I can independently transfer. During lockdown, I discovered that I could get off the floor, which I've never been able to do. And that was nearly 20 years after becoming injured. So
Wow, that's incredible.
yeah, I mean,
To get off the floor is incredible.
I
But
haven't
also
done it for a long
discovering it at that
time,
point.
but
Yeah.
yeah, I needed like a little step to put my hand on, but otherwise bum to seat. Which yeah, I was quite pleased about. But yeah,
Yeah.
so injury wise, injured above T6, so don't have control of my autonomic nervous system, which means in real terms I can't control my temperature, I can't sweat or get goosebumps, so I'd have very difficult times in cold weather. I'm better in hot. And I have no sensation below my chest. So, and everything else that comes with spinal injuries, as you'll be well versed in. But yeah, so that's how that presents, really.
Yeah. Let's talk about driving. You were injured at 16. Could you drive before that? Were
No,
you because you're legal?
because of my legal and just I'd never driven. I'd never driven in a car park or
Yeah.
messing
Right.
around with older kids that had cars or
Yeah.
anything like that. I'd never driven with my feet.
Yeah, sure. And were you kind of interested in driving and
Nope.
racing and stuff before? No, tell me.
Knew nothing
So
about it. Didn't know what racing was. My husband would say that I still don't. But yeah, no interest in cars. I used to knock about with kind of older boys who had cars, but the cars weren't really. It was just the the rebel in me that kind of took an interest in that. But no, when I got my first car, when I passed my test when I was 20, because I went to uni a year late, having spent my gap year in spinal rehab, which is how no one chooses to spend their gap year.
Yeah.
And I passed my driving test in my first year of uni. And so a car was just independence. It wasn't anything else other than that, which is a massive thing. You know, independence for someone with a spinal injury is huge, and being able to go somewhere on your own, even just to the shops or whatever, is, you'll know how big that is.
Massive. Yeah.
And I think that's where the passion for cars came from. It just, when I was first injured, the car was also an ability to be out in public without my wheelchair. So no one knew I was in a chair when I was in a car. And that's that whole process of being comfortable with a disabled identity. So that kind of helped me through that as well. So yeah, the passion for cars came from the independence, and I guess the coming to terms with being a disabled person, and then the speed must have come from somewhere else.
I mean, you've talked a little bit about kind of what driving represented for you and stuff. What was it like sort of being behind the wheel at first? And yeah, what did it kind of mean for you?
I remember, this sounds really strange, but I remember the first few times driving on my own, because I lived in Nottingham. I was at university at Nottingham, and driving down this specific road from the university back to my house. And I can remember feeling really overwhelmed with emotion, to the point where I actually had tears in my eyes, thinking about the achievement and what it meant for me to be able to drive and to be able to go places on my own. And that happened quite often, I think. So I think that kind of demonstrates the enormity of, and I don't know whether it's because I was in a car crash and that's how I broke my neck, or if it was just the independence and the kind of the significance of feeling like I was moving into the next phase of my life, that meant I could make all my own decisions. I could go wherever I wanted, whenever I wanted, and the world was my oyster. Which I don't know if that
Yeah.
sounds a bit sad,
Oh,
but
no, I think I completely relate. And I think that sounds really beautiful. You know, it's actually quite a simple thing, isn't it? You know, having access to four wheels and a motor and whatever else goes on in a car. But actually the liberation and the agency, like you say, that brings, you know, the options that you have is
yeah,
just game changing.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think it's probably the same for most young people as well. I think these days it's different, because a lot of young people aren't driving. But when I was 17, that's all anyone wanted to do. It was a big milestone. So I guess that feeling of freedom comes with anyone that gets their driving license. But I guess the emotion of it for someone with a disability is on a different scale.
Mm, mm, completely.
Maybe.
Literally thinking back to like, yeah, getting my first car. I got a Mini, a little pale blue Mini, and it
Nice.
took me time to get used to it. It really did. Like, I was in London. I hadn't driven in London before. I passed my test in Oxfordshire, and I went on the backup course. I went on the ski course, and I came back, and after that I was like, okay, I found my confidence. Let's get in this car and let's drive.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I think it can be challenging and, nerve-wracking when you're in a busy city and you've got an ambulance behind you and you're, figuring out the hand controls and stuff. But yeah.
London is a whole another thing with driving, especially if you
Yeah,
haven't
I love it
learned.
now though. I prefer driving in cities than anywhere else, I think. Probably. Where's your favourite place to drive, do you think?
Silverstone Race Circuit. Obviously. Well, I lived in London for 9 years. So I lived in Fulham and I really enjoyed driving in London. Do you know what? I went back. So I went to the Oasis concert in September and I haven't driven in London for years. And I've had a shoulder injury that I've been nursing since June. And I haven't just driven much because I've been in quite a lot of pain. And I got a hotel in near where I used to live, which is near the Chelsea football ground. And I had to drive from there to Wembley Stadium. And I can remember that like getting in the car and like driving and thinking, God, first of all, I haven't driven for a while. And secondly, I haven't driven in London for a long time. But it didn't take me like long to get back into you have to be assertive. If you want to get
Yeah,
out, you have to
yeah,
just
yeah,
go.
yeah.
Have to be
That's
aware of
so it.
people running across the road. And it was Chelsea kick out as well for the football match. So it was like, it didn't take me long to get back into it. And I remembered why I enjoyed driving through London so much. So I think London is one of my favorite places to drive if it's not just back to back traffic, which
Yeah, for
these days
sure.
it tends to be.
Absolutely, it does. So, yeah, let's talk about your kind of journey into professional racing and how it evolved into that. Would you sort of where did it start? Where did you get the first idea that you might want to do this?
Okay, so I can't tell this story without alienating myself from some of the listeners because I'll have to expose that I had a 911 road car and I still have a 911 road car, so Porsche 911. No, I'm in a lucky position. I was able to, to buy one of these, but just get out of the way in the beginning. So I got into racing primarily because someone told me that their car was faster than mine. So I was at a wheelchair rugby tournament in Toulouse and I had a Porsche 911 and a new player from the UK had, because wheelchair rugby was really close in those days, you knew everyone that played wheelchair rugby. And at this tournament, I met this new player who told me that he'd just ordered a BMW M3 and that it was faster than my 911. So at the time, I didn't know anything about cars. I just thought that my car was the fastest car that you could ever buy. And so he said, right, well, if you don't, you want to prove this debate, why don't we go on a track day when we get home? And so I didn't know what a track day was. I was like, well, what's that? And he said, well, we go to a racetrack and we both drive around at the same time and we see who's faster. So I was like, okay. Now track days you can't race. It's just, but you can gauge your speed against other track users. So we got home, we booked it, and I went to my first track day with my new friend. I'll give a shout out to Matt Sullivan, who was also tetraplegic, and I absolutely fell in love with it. It was like the speed and the adrenaline, being able to drive as fast as you dare, and for it to be legal. But secondly, what I loved about it was I could do the same thing at the same time as able-bodied people. And I hadn't had that privilege since being injured. And the weird thing was, or not the weird thing was, but the nice thing was that everyone that saw us were interested in our hand controls. They didn't care about why we were in a wheelchair. They didn't ask any questions about our disabilities. They were interested in the mechanical nature of how we controlled a car, given that our legs didn't work. And you know what it's like when sometimes you get that morbid fascination from the public about, wanting to know about the intricacies of why you're in a wheelchair. This was completely different. And I felt so comfortable in that environment, which was strange because I came from a wheelchair sport to an able-bodied activity, primarily male. I was the only. There was probably 10 women there, and maybe 60 or 70 men, and I was the only woman in a wheelchair. But I didn't feel, well, maybe I did feel like the only one, but maybe I like that.
Mm.
But I definitely didn't feel intimidated. I felt very at home, and I just caught the bug. That was it. And I wanted to do more. And Matt and I then went on many, many track days in our cars, and 6 years passed, and I thought, right, I'm gonna inquire about getting my racing license. It got to the point where I was going to tracks on my own in my car and just doing the track days, not because it was a social thing, but I was just addicted to the buzz. So I was at Silverstone, and I spoke to a guy there and just said, would it be possible? Can I get a racing license? And he said, there's no reason why not. This is the process. And then it started. So
Love
hence
that.
the,
What a great story coming into it.
yeah.
I hear you about kind of that feeling of sort of perhaps quite liking, being the only woman in that space sometimes as a part of that. I remember, skiing and being in the locker room with all the boys, and it's part of me like that for
Yeah.
sure.
Well, I think that you get to prove that the stereotype isn't correct, and you get to challenge those preconceptions. But wheelchair rugby is a mixed sport, and when I started playing, I was the only woman in the country. And then Josie Pearson, who I played with for a good number of years, who's a gold medalist in T51 discus at London. She started playing a few months after I did, but for a long time we were the only girls that played. So I was used to that.
So you got your racing license and you started racing. Can you tell me about kind of the journey a bit from there, and like some of the highlights that you've seen? Because it's been kind of phenomenal since I've got to know you and learnt about you, watching your journey. What have some of the highlights been for you?
I'll talk about a potential bump in the road when I first got my racing license, and then I'll talk about some of the highlights. So getting my racing license took me a year and a half, because at the time you had to, as a disabled person racing on adaptations, I had to do 4 hill climb or sprint events to prove that I was safe in a competitive environment on my hand controls. And then I had to take my ARDS test, which is like a driving test. So there's a theory and a practical. And almost the hill climbs were like signatures on my license to qualify it. So the time scale from kind of deciding to go racing to actually going racing was really drawn out compared to someone who races without disability. Which meant, and the reason for that is because the season for getting the signatures for my hill climb and sprints runs from like April till October. So during the other months, I couldn't get the signatures. So I got 3 signatures in that first year, but then the final signature was got like a month before my first race that I planned and I'd committed to. So my race license was given to me on the Wednesday, and my first race was on Saturday.
Oh, wow, love it.
So I'd been used to track days, but I hadn't had a huge amount of time in my race car. And there are events called test days that you practice for a race, but you need a racing license to participate in one. And my first test day was almost a complete disaster. So test days are different to track days, because track days are designed for novices. They have very strict safety rules, as you'll have known from coming on a Spinal Track day. Overtake on the left, on straight, and only by consent. Test days are just like racing. Overtake anywhere, everything that comes with that. And I suppose I was a bit stressed by the the whole experience, and then going into my race the next day and the second to last session of the day, I went out, and there's a famous corner at Brands Hatch called Paddock Hill Bend. And if you get it right, you're braking from about 130 miles an hour, you tip in, you kiss the apex, you go down a hill, up another hill, and off around the rest of the circuit. Now, I thought I was going in too quickly. So at the apex, I lifted, which means taking my hand off the accelerator, and I spun and I left the track. And as I left the track, I went into the gravel, and my car went up on two wheels and it almost rolled. So my husband, Andrew, was in the pit lane, and he said that you could see all of the underside of my car. And somehow it didn't go over, it just sat back down on all four wheels. And then I went back to the pits and my mechanics sorted all the gravel out, but my confidence was on the floor. And the next time I was out was my first ever qualifying.
Oh my gosh.
And I didn't do very well. I qualified second from last with only like a really slow car on different tires behind me. So it wasn't the greatest introduction, but the race was great. I think I qualified, I must have been 21st, and I finished 14th. So I made up places and it was incredible. And the season was okay, but you asked for highlights. These aren't highlights, but I think we can get to those. I had a crisis of confidence partway through because I had some developments done to the car, and I had a really, really strong qualifying session at a track called Snetterton. And I'd qualified in front of some of the Class 2 drivers who were fighting it out for the championship. And instead of them coming to me after the session and going, job well done, they basically came to me and told me not to get in their way. And
oh my gosh,
in one statement, it was just like, they've confirmed my worst fears. They don't think I belong here, and they don't think I'm one of them. And so I didn't have a great race, and I just carried that feeling with me into the next season. But the first race of the next season was at Brands Hatch again, and the qualifying wasn't great. But then for the second race, it rained, and I discovered I was an absolute demon in the wet. It was awesome. So
wow.
I went from, I think, 18th to 8th, and it was like torrential rain. And I was passing cars thinking, there must be something wrong with these other cars. But I could really, I think because everything in the wet is exaggerated, and a lot of disabled drivers who have paralysis kind of tell me the same thing, that a lot of racing drivers will say they feel the car through their bum. So some people call it like a bum dyno, where you can feel when the car's losing grip all through your bum, through the seats. And with paralysis, you don't have that. So your other senses are heightened, and I feel things through my kind of rib cage and the edge of the seat and process everything visually. So I think in the rain, because everything's intensified in terms of sensory, like information and feedback, I was just so comfortable because I was like, I know exactly what the car is doing. Whereas other drivers who rely on different senses and that being a bit more muted, I guess that pushes them over the edge. So
That's really interesting.
yeah, I loved it. And then I did a rain dance at every single race I had from like the next 2 years. But highlights, kind of now that it was 10 years last year that I had started racing, so this is my 11th year. I won my first race at Silverstone outright in 2018. That was amazing. My first podium that I got, where I was racing against, able-bodied drivers, most of the men, and I finished third. I couldn't believe it. And that sensation of thinking, not only am I good enough to be here, but I'm good enough to beat the majority of the field. Working for the FIA was a huge highlight. So that's quite a whole other story, but I will tell that. So the FIA, for those that don't know, are the global governing body of motorsport. So they run F1. They're responsible for all of the legislation that goes into racing cars around the world. And I was invited to one of their commission conferences. So the FIA has a number of commissions that deal with different aspects of motorsport, and they have a Women in Motorsport commission. And in 2017, actually it was 2016, I was invited to Portugal to speak at the Women in Motorsport conference. And off the back of that, the General Secretary for Sport was there. The Vice President for Sport was there, and he asked me if I would go to the full FIA conference the following year in Geneva and talk about disabled motorsport and safety. And Jean Todt was the president at the time. And I remember being at this hotel, and there was like an event in the evening, and Jean was greeting everyone as they went into the pool area for like a barbecue, like a social event. And he shook my hand. He said, "Hello, I'm Jean Todt." I won't do his accent, he's French. And I said, "Hello, Jean, I'm Nathalie." And he just said, "I know who you are." And I was like, right, okay, Jean Todt knows who I am. And when I did my speech, I saw him quite clearly having reserved a seat at the front of the auditorium. And he sat there. And at the end of my speech, he greeted me off the ramp for the stage and congratulated me on a job well done. And I thought, oh, great, I've made an impression on a really important person in motorsport. This was a really good day. Later that year, I was invited to the FIA offices in Paris to have a further discussion on what I thought was just disabled motorsport and safety. And I got the Eurostar there with my husband, Andrew. And when we arrived, the General Secretary for Sport, Peter Bayer, was there, who is now the CEO for VCARB Racing, who are an F1 team. And there was the president of the medical commission, Gérard Sallion. And we were there for about 45 minutes, and they were showing me all of these different documents that they'd drawn up for disabled motorsport. And I was giving them feedback. And Peter said, "Oh, I'm really sorry. I don't think we've actually told you why we've invited you here today." And I said, "Well, I just kind of thought it was to discuss this." He said, "Oh, no, Jean has created a new commission called the Disability and Accessibility Commission. He'd like you to be president of it." And I was just like, okay. And I finished university and played wheelchair rugby. I'd never worked for a corporation before or even had what people would classify as a real job. So I said yes immediately. And then kind of the reality of I've said yes to something and I have no idea what this entails. So I was invited to the Geneva offices the following year to participate in World Motorsport Council, which is where some of those most important people in motorsport sit around and make decisions about the future of the sport. And I thought, oh, what if I'm exposed as some kind of fraud? Or, I'd only been in sport for a few years, but I went in and no one had really briefed me. And we'd had meetings with my commission manager about what the commission's pillars were and what our objectives were for the next 5 years. And as the meeting was going on, I think the meeting lasts for about 3.5, 4 hours, I realised that I would have to present. And no one had told me. So I scribbled down some notes halfway through about what I wanted to say. And when it came around to my commissions part, I presented my my ambitions. I made it very clear because I was sat in a room with a load of men in suits who were all kind of 60 plus. I was the only woman and the only disabled woman. And I made it very clear to people that because most of them weren't English speaking, that I didn't care if they got the name of my disability wrong or didn't know the right terminology. All I cared about was making progress. So you won't offend me. Come and speak to me and let us work it out together. And at the end of it, Jean gave me a round of applause, and I was like, "Oh, okay, I've done okay." And yeah,
I'm just going to say, I love that approach. I love that, to say that, you're okay. Like, don't worry about it. Like, let's move forwards. And, because I think that can be such a barrier, can't it? Around what do I say? How do I deal with this? Yeah, that's incredible.
Well,
I
I
love
think
that.
in this day and age now, where there's so much inclusion, but there's also so much political backlash about saying the wrong thing, and the right thing changes all the time, that I think it's so counterproductive to use words that create this otherness around disability, and words like ableism and all of these different terminologies. I think that they are not what we need for progress. I just think we need frank and honest discussions. And if you get it wrong, I'll tell you how to get it right, and I'll educate you. I don't want the offense. I just want the progress. So yeah, I've been in that role ever since, and that's how I always carry out our work, and that's how I'll always carry out the work. So yeah, massive privilege and highlight for me.
Yeah, I bet. It's incredible. Super influential. There's so much that I would like to ask you. I think I would be remiss not to want to find out about Spinal Track. I think our listeners will be super keen to hear about, and some of them won't have heard of it. So would you tell us about that, and kind of where it came from?
So Spinal Track is a charity that my husband and I run for people with physical disabilities to get behind the wheel of a track car around the Silverstone GP circuit, and get a bit of a small taster of what I love doing. So Spinal Track started because when I first started racing, both Andrew and myself got so many messages on social media saying, "We didn't know that this was possible for us to do. How can we have a go?" And people still come to me and say, I want to come on a race day." And I think track days and racing are very different, but I think the terminology people use when they say, "I want to race a car," is they just mean, "I want to drive a car around a race circuit." So when we were getting all of these messages, I was kind of like, I don't know what the answer is, because I was in a really fortunate position when I started track days, that my road car was suitable and I could drive it to the track and do what I loved, and that worked for me. But a lot of people aren't in that situation, and even if they are, some of them don't have the confidence or the social network around them that would encourage them to do that. So Andrew and I had just bought a Golf GTI from another paraplegic. So I had a friend who is a paraplegic who races, and he was racing at Snetterton. And Andrew and I went to spectate. This was before I had my license, I think, or maybe it was the year I was getting my license. But anyway, Neil, our friend who we bought the car from, was selling this Golf, and he had spent so much money on it, making it this amazing track car. It had super track suspension, it had race seats, it had half a cage in it. He'd spent about 30 grand on it, but it was an awful road car because it was so stiff. He drove it down to the south of France, but he was selling it for like not even half of that. And Andrew and I bought it so that we could have a car that we could take to the track, and we weren't nervous in the rain that we were going to damage it, because my road car was a rear wheel drive car, and wheel drive cars in the rain are a bit sketchy. So we bought it, and we'd done a few track days with it. And when we were having all these messages from people asking how they could get involved, we were like, well, why don't we create something? So I don't even know how we started the process. I think we we might have written a few things down on paper, but we'd never done anything like this before. And the first official meeting we had was with someone at Silverstone. I don't remember how we got his details, but we went for a meeting with him and we said, we've got an idea, got a car. Andrew had been my instructor for like my racing, so was an unofficial race instructor, knew about hand controls. And we said, well, you know, what do you think? And is there any way you can give us some direction about how we can move forward? And he just presented me with this piece of paper. He said, they're all our track days that we've got this year. You can have a place on every single day, on every single one of them for free. And we were like,
wow.
okay. So that got us started. And so we were like, okay, this could happen. So I selected 4 of my friends to come to a different track, Bedford, to kind of test a product, if you like. And I said, look, we just need feedback. We need to know what you think. They obviously all loved it. And the basis of a Spinal Track Day was created in theory. My friend Josie, who I've spoken about before, in earlier on in the podcast, said, let me give you one piece of advice. She said, you can't offer this for free. You need something to ensure people turn up. So when we came up with the theory of Spinal Track, I always wanted it to be for free, because I've been involved in wheelchair rugby for 10 years and I have seen how easy it is for those with compensation claims to be able to commit to the sport. And I've seen the flip side of that, how difficult it is for those without to do the same. So I didn't want Spinal Track to be another thing that only people with money could do. So it was always going to be for free. But when Josie said this, we were like, right, we've got to give an incentive for people to turn up. So it's a £200 deposit that just makes sure there's some value to it, because when things are free, they have no value. And yeah, so we started running it, and for the first maybe 3 or 4 months, we were running it out of our own pocket. And we had a chat with each other that was like, we can't really continue to do this unless something comes along. We might just have to can it. And that very week, we had someone we met at a track day give us a donation. And then on the track day the following month, we met someone who gave us another donation, and it just allowed us to keep going. And I mean, like I say, we didn't know what we were doing. We probably didn't have the right processes involved. We were a CIC at first. But one of the things that, like the track days being free, the other thing was that Andrew and I don't get paid for running Spinal Track. We never will. We never have done. We never will, because we get so much from it that's our payment. Like hanging around with people at a track day, celebrating motorsport. That's my substitute for what I miss with wheelchair rugby. So that's how I'll always run it. But the real kind of kick-off with Spinal Track was due to me crashing the Spinal Track car. So we went to a circuit in Belgium called Spa in the Spinal Track car, because at that time it was still my car, mine and Andrew's car. We still owned it. So we were using it for our kind of stuff and Spinal Track stuff. And first session after lunch, went out, cold tyres, too fast into the chicane and crashed it into the Armco. We had a Spinal Track day 2 weeks later. So we managed to get it fixed, but Andrew was like, we need a second car. So he put out a Just Giving page on Facebook for like an appeal for funding for a second car. And not long after that, I got a message from someone called Mike Simpson. And he said, can I have a call with you about Spinal Track? Now, first of all, I thought it was a bit weird because he wanted a call with me on Facebook Messenger. And I was like, no one calls on Facebook Messenger. So anyway, I had this call with him and he said, I'm CMO of a company called Stanley. What would you say if I wanted to give you some tools and a bit of money to run Spinal Track, and I wanted to do the same with your racing? And I was like, oh yeah, that sounds great. And I hung up the phone and I said to Andrew, some dreamer wants to help us with Spinal Track and my racing and give us a bit of money and some tools. Says they're from a company called Stanley. Because I'd had a lot of people kind of get in touch and want a part of it, and it just came to nothing. So Andrew did a bit of research, and he was like, Mike Simpson is the CEO of Stanley Black & Decker, one of the biggest tools companies in America. And I was like, oh, okay. So Mike set up a call with us, and they bought us a second car. They came on board as our headline sponsor, and they sponsored us for 4 years. And in that time, we got 3 Spinal Track cars, so that we had 2 that we ran on a day and 1 that we had as a spare. And it allowed us to then progress into a charity. We got a board of trustees. Mike Simpson is now one of our trustees. He doesn't work for Stanley Black & Decker anymore. He lives back in the UK. But yeah, so that someone believing in us gave us the opportunity to make us into what we are today. And now we did have a rally program, but unfortunately the rally school closed down, which in the rally program teaches car control skills, so how to initiate and control oversteer, and the most fun you'll ever have in a car is sliding it around. And I was devastated when that stopped. But on Saturday we have our replacement program starting, which will be at the Porsche Experience Centre at Silverstone in our Spinal Track cars. And instead of sliding around on gravel, you're sliding around on slippery surfaces. So we can't wait to kick that off.
Wow.
But
that's so cool.
Sorry, just to wrap up, we also now run community events. So we've partnered with Aston Martin F1. And we have our Christmas party, our summer party, various other events at the factory where the F1 cars are made. And yeah, I just love it.
That's amazing. It's amazing. I love it. And if people want to get involved, how, they're listening, they have a spinal cord injury, their family member does, what do they do?
So Spinal Track isn't just for people with spinal cord injuries. We are for anyone who has a physical disability that needs an adaptation in their car that would otherwise prevent them from accessing track days. We're also for novices. If you've already taken the journey that I have, then, we're not for you, because we're so overrun by inquiries. We have to make sure we prioritize those that can't access this in any other way. But we just had a glorious new website built. So the website is spinaltrack.org. There is information on that about how to apply. We release our calendar 3 times a year. The events get booked up within hours. So if you're really seriously interested, be on the ball. You can get added to a WhatsApp group, which I release the dates to, so you don't miss out on that announcement. And yeah, get in line to come and drive a fantastic car on hand controls or left foot accelerators around Silverstone.
To get your license, did you have to prove you could get out of the car within a period of time? Can you tell me about that?
So when I inquired about getting my license, the rule was different. You had to demonstrate that you could get out of a racing car, in a driving position, harnessed in, onto the floor next to your car in 7 seconds. So that's changed now to 10 seconds, but I had to prove that I could do that to get my license. And it's so, if anything happens on the race circuit and the car sets on fire, you can get out. Now, there are arguments that you could be knocked unconscious, and if you're unconscious, then that might be the same for an able-bodied driver, and then the marshals would have to come and get you out. But I think it's right, because you shouldn't put yourself in a position where, if you cannot get out of the car if it's on fire, every time you go out, you're expecting the marshals to put their lives at risk to come and save you. So, if something happens and you can't get out, then it would be the same as an able-bodied person. But if you can get out, then you need to be able to. And I don't believe you should be racing if you can't achieve that. So yeah, I did. When I found out that was a non-negotiable part of my license, I did wonder if it was even possible. But it turns out it is. So yeah, it's not pretty, but it's doable.
And hopefully something you don't have to do more than once to prove it.
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah.
Fingers crossed.
Oh, beautiful. There is so much more I would like to ask you and to go into detail about. This conversation has been so rich. There's a couple of questions that we ask all of our podcast guests at the end. We haven't talked a huge amount of your sort of journey with your spinal cord injury, but if you could go back to 16-year-old Nathalie and tell her one thing, what would it be to your newly injured self?
I wrote a post about this recently on Instagram. There was a trend of if I could meet my younger self for coffee. I think I would tell her not to be scared and not to worry about being the odd one out, and that being different is actually a superpower, or it has been for me. And I would also tell her never to underestimate the value of peer support, because wheelchair rugby gave me the confidence to go into racing. It gave me the confidence to just go out into the world and be myself with no apologies. So, yeah, I think the two key pieces of advice are seek out peer support of people like you and really not embellish, enjoy your USP, your unique selling point, because that gives you an edge over someone else. And it doesn't matter that the unique selling point is that you have a spinal injury. Turn it into a superpower.
Love that. Love that. Thank you. Beautiful advice. And our final question is, what's your advice for living well with a spinal cord injury?
I think the best piece of advice for living with a spinal cord injury is look after your health and don't neglect pressure sores or health things that are exclusive to spinal cord injury that you can, if you get on top of things, absolutely do the time to recover from them. So pressure marks, don't let them get into pressure sores. Keep off your bum when you have got a mark so that it doesn't progress more than that. Eat healthily. Don't be too heavy so that your shoulders and your transfers compromise. Eat clean. Normal health advice, but I think for us, it's so much more important. Don't neglect your hydration. I think hydration for spinal cord injuries is so much more than hydration just for our bladders and everything that goes with that. And educate people about autonomic dysreflexia if you are one of the levels that suffer with it. Because I think if you have an advocate, may that be a family member or a close friend, that if it happens and you have to go into hospital, that someone can advocate for you that this is a real thing and it's a life-threatening thing and know how to treat it. So I know that was a lot of answers to one question, but
very sound advice, all of it. Thank you, Nathalie. Thank you for this conversation. It's been really, really beautiful. I've learned a lot and I feel deeply inspired, to be honest. So thank you for that.
Thank you for having me on.